Muchachos y muchachas, this is day 4 of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, where we are recapping new witness testimonies, the first of which Paul Kane, a finance director for the Professional Children's School in the Upper West Side in New York, Dr. 𝘰𝘵𝘬𝘪𝘭𝘭, who is a clinical forensic psychologist with an expertise in trauma, as well as Juan Alisi, a property manager who is employed by Epstein to manage his home. Stay right there. We're going to go through it. In a recent study, women say there's an 8-year gap between how they look and how they feel. In the same study, 66% of women said their quality of life would improve if they looked younger. Our satisfaction with life sometimes is directly tied to our appearance and age. This is why I highly recommend Brighten with Natly. This product helps reduce the appearance of dark spots and age spots. It's the most effective anti-aging solution I've ever used. Brighten with Natly gives my skin a smoother, younger look by reducing the appearance of skin contrast. These skin contrasts include sunspots, dark spots, and age spots. Reducing the appearance of these plays a huge role in anti-aging. If you want to help reduce the appearance of your aging spots, you'll love Brighten with Natly. Get up to 50% off for the next 24 hours by going to brightwithnatly.com or clicking the link below in my description. All right, let's get to the business. Before we do, I just want to remind you guys that I just launched my new cosmetic line, and I'm obviously using this palette. This is mine here, but it comes with 9 pigmented eyeshadows, and it's a little messy, again, because I've been using it. 2 blushes, a highlighter, and a contour. And the pigment is amazing, and the collection comes with 3 long-lasting lipsticks. So if you are looking to support a Patriot-owned business, especially in cosmetics, you want to go to natlydenisecosmetics.com. Also part of the collection is the 𝘱𝘭𝘏 Mauve, in which every single cent of the purchase price will go towards human trafficking rescue and aftercare. That is my way of giving back to the community. So with that being said, let's jump right in. So this is day 4 of Ghislaine Maxwell trial. This is a recap. They did call new witnesses. Yesterday, we left off with Mr. Vesselman, who was an executive at the 𝘸𝘪𝘭𝘭 school, who did testify in the logistics timing of the donations of Epstein, the logistics of his little secret lair of a cabin lodge that was even named after him, in which he was allowed to stay there for up to 2 weeks a year. And there were other witness testimonies that attested to, just the time at the summer camp. And we dug into a lot of juicy details about 𝘸𝘪𝘭𝘭, the special fine arts kids camp in Michigan. So today we start off with Paul Kane. Paul Kane is the finance director of the Professional Children's School on the Upper West Side in New York. Something interesting about this: one of the 4 alleged victims, Jane, who we've been hearing for the past few days, attended the exclusive prep school, which counts Uma Thurman, Paris Hilton among its alumni, for her senior year moving to the Big Apple from Palm Beach, Florida. Kane was asked to look at an application to the institution, purportedly Jane's, that showed Jeffrey Epstein as having financial responsibility for her schooling. So we're just going to jump to a transcript really quick just to get, it's not very long, this testimony. I think they were just trying to prove the financial responsibility of this particular Jane. And they tie it to Jeffrey Epstein somehow. Here we go. So, Attorney USA, who is the prosecution team against Ghislaine Maxwell, asks, look at Government Exhibit 721. Do you recognize it? Paul Kane responds, an enrollment application for a student. Attorney USA then asks, don't say the name, is it an accurate copy? And Paul Kane replies, yes, it is. Or yes, just yes. Maxwell's lawyer then cites objection, hearsay. Attorney USA says it's a business record, and so Judge Nathan overruled. Maxwell's lawyer then asks, can I question the witness? And Judge Nathan presides, go ahead. Maxwell's lawyer then then asks, the professional children's school doesn't verify the accuracy of the info on the form, does it? And Paul Kane responds, I think they do. Maxwell's lawyer, who is defending Maxwell, says all of it, and Paul Kane responds that I don't know. Maxwell's lawyer then says, so the info. Attorney USA then interjects, Your Honor, may I? And Judge Nathan says, you may. Attorney USA then asks, what happens to the info coming in? Kane responds, contact the family by phone, then invite them to tour the school and have a conversation. Attorney USA then responds, does the school rely on the form? And Kane says, yes. After a sidebar document is in, Attorney USA then asks, what grade was the person applying for? And Kane responds, 12th, due to a move in New York. Attorney USA then says, who listed as a person of financial responsibility? And Kane responds, Mr. Jeffrey Epstein. Attorney USA then responds, thanks. No further questions. Now, I'm just going to comment that this was a very short cross-examination on the part of the prosecution team. I think that they got exactly what they needed. And to me, this seems a lot more tactful, and there's something going on in the background as far as their strategy, obviously. But that was it as far as their side. Maxwell's lawyer then asks, which again is a cross-examination on the part of the defense of Maxwell. But they ask, you have no idea if Mr. Epstein actually paid? And Paul Kane responds, I do not. Maxwell's lawyer then asks, and for the mother, does it say unemployed? And Kane responds, it says self-employed as an interior decorator. Maxwell's lawyer then asks, and who is listed as the agent? And Attorney USA then objection. Judge Nathan presides, just make the jurors look at it. So Maxwell's lawyer says, look at the name on the corner and the name of the prior principal. You don't have to say them for the record, no further questions. Judge Nathan then presides, thank you, Mr. Kane. Next U.S. witness, it's Dr. 𝘰𝘃𝘀𝘀. And then Dr. 𝘰𝘃𝘀𝘀 goes into her credentials to qualify her as a clinical expert in, forensics, psychology, and trauma, expertise in trauma. So she begins, I have a master's PhD from U of Rhode Island, and continues on. So fast forward into the expert testimony of this professional. Okay, after a long presentation of credentials, 𝘰𝘃𝘀𝘀 is an expert. Attorney USA then asks, did you interview anyone in this case? And Dr. 𝘰𝘃𝘀𝘀 says no. Attorney USA on the prosecution team then asks, does your pay depend on the outcome of this trial? And Dr. 𝘰𝘃𝘀𝘀 responds no. Attorney USA then asks, what is grooming? 𝘰𝘃𝘀𝘀 responds, strategies to get children into sex. And I want you to really pay attention, not just for the sake of this trial, but for the sake of our culture. You know, I do want you to pay attention to this clinical forensic psychologist that specializes in trauma. Now, this is a big pivotal step in grooming, transforming, breaking process in the process of trafficking and grooming and coercing a victim into that sort of horrific life. 𝘰𝘃𝘀𝘀 says, I've seen grooming in the Boy Scouts through a special camping trip or jewelry, anything to make the children feel like they are appreciated. During the Daubert hearing before trial, Maxwell's lawyer asked, does this mean that the grandparents are grooming? And we'll get to that statement. Attorney USA, how common is it for a child to be repeatedly abused by the same perpetrator? Dr. 𝘰𝘃𝘀𝘀 then responds, very common. It's by people close to the child. Attorney USA then asks, what is a grooming environment? And Dr. 𝘰𝘃𝘀𝘀 responds, the perpetrator develops trust with people around the child, for example, with the parents. Continued on. Are victims of, and this is by the prosecution team asking Dr. 𝘰𝘃𝘀𝘀, what are victims of child sexual abuse likely to report it to the police? 𝘰𝘃𝘀𝘀 responds, no. Attorney USA then asks, how did they talk about it? Maxwell's lawyer objects, objection, no foundation. Judge Nathan says, I'll sustain. Can you rephrase? Attorney USA then rephrases and says, what is the long-term impact? And Dr. 𝘰𝘃𝘀𝘀 responds, they are at higher risk for adverse outcomes. Attorney USA then responds, nothing further. Judge Nathan says, let's take a break. So Before I continue on, because I do believe that 𝘥𝘆𝑗𝑎 does continue on her testimony, but I think that this part is especially interesting because, as we've covered in the past few days, the way that Jeffrey Epstein targeted his victims were always through vulnerable situations. A lot of times, in fact, and a majority of these times, or testimonies or articles that gave some form of testimony, it always listed that these victims had no father figure. Either they died of a sickness, or they weren't present, or they came from broken homes. This is always, almost always, majority of the time, the way that these traffickers, pimps, and abusers target their victims. They will look for vulnerable spots, and they will probe a lot of times into the background of these said victims. So, they probe, they get to learn their history, and then they move in for their move in entrapping them and ensorceling them into the life of coercion, trafficking, abuse, sexual exploitation, you name it. Continued on with the testimony. Maxwell's lawyer, Dr. 𝘥𝘆𝘏, or Maxwell's lawyer asked Dr. 𝘥𝘆𝘏, Dr. 𝘥𝘆𝘏, you have a $45,000 contract for this, correct? And 𝘥𝘆𝘏 responds, yes. And Maxwell's lawyer then asked, if one had a brain injury, it might be hard to remember, right? Attorney USA prosecution team then objects. Objection. Judge Nathan says sustain. Maxwell's lawyer, alcohol would harm recall too, yes. And Attorney USA then says objection. Judge Nathan sustained. Maxwell's lawyer, are you familiar with confabulation? Attorney USA then objects. Judge Nathan overrules. Maxwell's lawyer then says it's a filling in the gaps. Attorney USA objects again, and Judge Nathan sustains. Maxwell's lawyer then states, asks, my grandfather liked to take me to the Bronx Zoo. Was that grooming? And the independent journalist notes, yes, he went there, which I find a little bit, and this is just my opinion, it feels a little bit like re-exploitation of a situation, especially manipulating this sort of scenario. Because, of course, there is a difference between taking care of somebody, taking care of a child, and, maybe rewarding them with a trip, or, versus leveraging the manipulation of that reward to get that child to do what a person wants. So I just want to state and kind of interject my opinion that there's definitely a difference between rewarding children and, treating them than treating them with the motive behind it to exploit them. There's two different scenarios. Now, I believe that Maxwell's lawyer here was trying to conflate these two scenarios into one, which is definitely not always, it's not the case that, rewarding trips or, treating a child, it's not always exploitation. So I just find that very egregious that the lawyer would even conflate the two type of scenarios. So continued on. All right. So we went through the prosecutors, Paul Kane, Dr. Lisa Rocchio, clinical and forensic psychologist with an expertise in traumatic stress and interpersonal violence, has now taken the stand. She's been asked to describe the concept of grooming, which we just went through, or the tactics and strategies used by child sexual abusers. They will exploit whatever vulnerabilities they have identified in a child, Rocchio testified. And that's basically what it boils down to. It is leveraging vulnerabilities of a said victim, whether it's a child or a woman or what have you. And when they identify those vulnerabilities, they exploit them by love bombing them, buying them gifts, tripping them, and all, giving them trips, and, making them feel very taken care of, and then taking that additional step to exploit the child or the said victim. So that's what it basically boils down to. Now, All right, moving on to a bit of a recap. Now, I find it interesting that the New York Post didn't finish off their recap post of the entire trial, because there's actually an additional person that was implicated in the testimony, and that's Mr. Juan Alisi, who is a property manager, an employee to the Epstein homes, if you will. And so for this part, I'm going to jump to the New York Times that actually did write out a recap for this portion. Ghislaine Maxwell controlled every detail of the life of Jeffrey Epstein's Palm Beach estate, a former manager of the property, Juan Alisi, said Thursday during the fourth day of Maxwell's sex trafficking trial in the federal district court in Manhattan. Mr. Juan Alisi, 71 years old, said that he had worked in this estate from around 1990 to 2002. He testified that he had a cordial relationship with Mr. Epstein before Ms. Maxwell arrived, but after her arrival in the early 1990s, he said that the dynamic changed, meaning that he had that working relationship with Epstein directly, but when Ghislaine Maxwell came into the picture, she was starting to control the situation. He said Ms. Maxwell instructed him on how to speak to Mr. Epstein. Mr. Epstein doesn't like to be looked at in the eyes, Mr. Alisi said. Ms. Maxwell told him, never look at the eyes, look in another part of the room and answer him, which is quite, again, just another strange detail to all this, that she was trying to control the bodily movements of said employees. He couldn't even look at Epstein in the eyes. Mr. Alisi said that there was a tremendous amount of instructions, including how dishes were to be presented and how the table was to be set. There were rules about how the employees should dress and how they should address Mr. Epstein and Ms. Maxwell and the guests. Prosecutors said that the rules of the house were documented in a 58-page household manual. Mr. Alisi, who left his job with Mr. Epstein before that version of the booklet was created, said he recognized most of it. Remember that you see nothing, hear nothing, say nothing except to answer the question direct to you. One section of the booklet read, respect their privacy. Mr. Alisi said that he took those instructions as a kind of warning. Mr. Alisi said that he remembers seeing two girls who appeared to be underage, including one now an adult, who testified earlier in Ms. Maxwell's trial using the name Jane. He said that he had first met Jane in 1994 and remembered the first time she visited the estate with her mother. I don't know exactly how old she was, but she appeared to be young. Mr. Alisi said, I would say 14 or 15. Earlier that week, Jane testified that she was 14 years old when she met Mr. Epstein and Ms. Maxwell. He said that he was instructed by Mr. Epstein or Ms. Maxwell to pick up Jane from either school or their home. He had described Jane as a strikingly beautiful girl who is very pleasant. Earlier this week, Jane testified that she remembered a Latin American man picking her up to visit Mr. Epstein. Mr. Alisi from Ecuador. He said he only saw her interact with Mr. Epstein and Ms. Maxwell, but he did not say that he saw any sexual contact between them. Mr. Alisi said that Mr. Epstein received around one massage per day in the beginning of his employment, but toward the end of time he left the job, Mr. Epstein was receiving around 3 massages a day. Okay, so let's go straight to the transcripts and take a look at these details. And I will advise that this does get graphic. Viewer discretion is advised once again, because this does get pretty descriptive as far as the scenario surrounding the Epstein household and the things and activities that were happening. All right. So let's get to Mr. Juan Alisi's beginning of the testimony here. There we go. It's pretty long, so give me one moment. I'm sorry. Oh. Come on. There we go. Okay, here we go. Maxwell's lawyer, Dr. 𝘱𝑗, we left off with the testimony for the $45,000 contract for this, correct? All right, continued on. So we're just going to finish off Dr. 𝘱𝘭𝘐𝑻's testimony here. Alcohol would harm recall too. We left off here. Dr. 𝘱𝘭𝘐, you have a $45,000 contract for this, correct? And Dr. 𝘱𝘭𝘐 says yes. Maxwell's lawyer, if one had a brain injury, it might be hard to remember, right? Attorney USA objects. Judge Nathan sustained. Maxwell's lawyer, alcohol would harm recall too, yes. Another objection by the prosecution team. Judge Nathan sustains. Maxwell's lawyer says, are you familiar with confabulation? Objection overruled. Maxwell's lawyer says it's filling in the gaps. Objection sustained. The next witness is Juan Patricio Ilici. Where do you come from? And Ilici responds, Quito, Ecuador. Early 1984, I worked for a wealthy family in Palm Beach. I'm sorry, when did you move to Florida? And he responds, early 1984, I worked for a wealthy family in Palm Beach. I was a maintenance guy. Then I worked for Mr. Jeffrey Epstein. Attorney USA, who's the prosecution team against Maxwell, asks, how did you meet Epstein? And Ilici responds, I was working on Mr. Wexner's mother's house. Who is in this photo? Mr. Jeffrey Epstein. Attorney USA then goes into questioning. When Mr. Epstein was in Palm Beach, where did you sleep? Ilici responds, I had a room there. Attorney USA then asks, who else worked there? And Ilici responds, I brought my wife to help me and other girls. Continued on. Attorney USA asks, how did things change after Maxwell got involved? Ilici responds, things were less cordial. Less conversation. I was not allowed to see Mr. Epstein anymore unless he asked me questions. Ms. Maxwell said, don't look at his eyes, look at another part of him. And with that, a blueprint of the house on the screens. Judge Nathan says, the jurors' lunch has arrived, let's break. And so they break. Continued on, they come back. Ilici, the second floor, that is toward Mr. Epstein's bedroom. I'm sorry, let me go back one transcript. Ilici is describing Epstein's Palm Beach home in great detail. Presumably, it will become relevant in the testimony of survivor witness number 2, 3, and 4. Attorney USA then orders, pull up government exhibit 297, Mr. Ilici, what is this? And then he responds, the second floor, that is towards Mr. Epstein's bedroom. There was a huge bathroom. Attorney USA then responds with a question, and what was the other bathroom? Ilici says, that's Miss Maxwell's bathroom. Attorney USA then says, but they both came off the master bedroom? And Ilici responds, yes. Then Attorney USA asks, where did Miss Maxwell sleep in the Palm Beach house? Maxwell's lawyer says, objection, but it's allowed. Ilici responds, she slept with Mr. Epstein's bedroom, in Mr. Epstein's bedroom. Attorney USA then asks, how many times did you see females by Mr. Epstein's pool? And Ilici responds, hundreds, meaning hundreds of times. Attorney USA then asks, how often were they topless? Ilici responds, 75% of the time. Attorney USA asks, how about Little St. James? And Ilici responds, I was on a cruise with my wife to St. Thomas. They picked us up and showed us Little St. James. It was huge. Attorney USA then asks, how did you visit any Miss Maxwell property? Ilici then says, her townhome in London, she invited us. It had a red front door. Attorney USA then says, what conversations did you have with Miss Maxwell about this booklet? Ilici replies, I told her I could not go do this checklist with all my other work. Attorney USA says, show them government exhibit 606. Attorney USA says, how long is this book? And he replied, 58 pages. What is it? A list of what we're supposed to do to maintain the house. Now Maxwell's lawyer will question Ilici about the book of instructions. Maxwell's lawyer, asks, when you left, you didn't have this in your possession, did you? And Ilici said, no, I did not. Maxwell's lawyer then says, but this book was created after you left, at least by the date on it. Maxwell's lawyer responds, we object to 606. Attorney USA says he identified pages. Judge Nathan says, I'm overruling the objection. 606 is admitted. Attorney USA then asks, we I believe the transcript means, will you recognize the address at the bottom? And Elyse responds, Mr. Epstein's residence. Attorney USA then asks, there's a reference to the JE and the GM telephone directories. What were they? And Elyse responds, books with hundreds and hundreds of names, directions, and addresses. Elyse then asks or responds, they were 2 inches thick, full of names. Attorney USA, for some reason, turning away from the 2 black books, at least for now. Let's turn to page 23 about Miss Maxwell's desk. What does it say? Elyse then responds, please the directory to, or place the directory to the right of the phone. There's some typos here, so that's why I'm stumbling and trying to fix them in my head. Assistant U.S. Attorney then asks, what is this? Elyse then says, instructions for serving breakfast, sometimes at 5 a.m. Attorney USA then asks, who else worked there? Elyse says, chefs, my wife, Miss Maxwell's assistant, then Sarah Kellen. Elyse then responds more, 2 females seem to be underage. Attorney USA says, don't say their names. Jurors, look at the binders under your chairs, GX12, which I'm going to assume is a reference point to maybe the names of these 2 said females. Elyse then says, can I have a cup of water? Then Attorney USA, is that the name of the person we call Jane? And Elyse responds, yes. I met Virginia Roberts too. Attorney USA then asks, you met Jane, how old was she? And Elyse responds, appeared to be 14 or 15. She was beautiful, beautiful eyes, long brunette hair, very pleasant. 3 times she was there with her mother, then without her mother many times. Attorney USA then asks, how would Jane get to the house? Juan Elyse then responds, I would pick her up and the direction of Mr. Epstein or Miss Maxwell. Attorney USA then responds, when did you meet Miss Virginia Roberts? Elyse then responds, I was at Mar-a-Lago with Miss Maxwell. I waited in the car like the driver. Now, I just want to inject some knowledge here. Virginia Roberts Giuffre actually worked at Mar-a-Lago as, I believe, a masseuse or an intern there. But there is no concrete details as to, if this was a legitimate job or, if it was, I believe it was Epstein that corrupted the entire thing and he coerced her away from Mar-a-Lago. So there's a lot of details to be had and said about this particular piece. So I just want to clarify that piece. Elyse then says, it was a hot day and Miss Maxwell said, stop, John, stop. And I did, and Miss Maxwell went up to this girl. Attorney USA says, where was this girl? Elyse says, she was coming down the ramp. Attorney USA says, how did she look? And Elyse said, young. So this is the part where I'm going to assume that it was Ghislaine Maxwell that recruited and coerced Virginia Roberts Giuffre from Mar-a-Lago, where she was working. Elyse then says, then by 5 p.m. I saw her, Virginia Roberts, back at the house. And then Attorney USA says, show exhibits 113 and 114 only to the witness and the parties. How old did you think Miss Roberts was? And Elyse says 14 or 15. Attorney USA says, did Miss Maxwell ever instruct you to pick up Miss Roberts? And Elyse responds, yes. Attorney USA, did you ever see Miss Roberts at Mr. Epstein's home with the luggage? And Elyse says, yes, I drove them to the plane. Attorney USA asks, how many massages would Mr. Epstein get a day? And Elyse said, before I left, 3 a day. I called whoever they told me to call. Attorney USA then asks, did the phone books we discussed have names for the massage in them? And Elyse responds, yes. Did you see Jane's name in it? Yes. The books were updated twice a year. What did you do with them and the new ones that were made? Elyse responds, just throw them away. Attorney USA then goes into a question. I have a physical exhibit GX52. May I approach the witness? Do you recognize it? Attorney USA then asks, what is it? And Elyse responds, it's a directory. Did you review it last night? I did. Every page? Yes. How many names? Many, 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 responds Elyse. Continued on, Attorney USA, is this the name you saw when you were that or a later version? And 𝘱𝘂 responds a later version. Attorney USA then instructs, pull up Exhibit 52A. It is a sealed exhibit. Judge Nathan says, let's take a break. Continued on. 𝘱𝘂 is back. Attorney USA, how often was the directory updated? 𝘱𝘂 says twice a year, and the names of the new employees were added and those who left were taken out. Attorney USA then goes into detail. Is Sarah Kalin in this version? Objection leading. Judge Nathan says, I'll overrule that. Long sidebar, after which Maxwell's lawyer does the questioning. Maxwell's lawyer, are you sitting here today, 19 years later, you have no idea where Exhibit 52 has been? Maxwell's lawyer then goes into questioning. You said the book was 2 inches thick, but Exhibit 52 is 1/4 of an inch thick, correct? 𝘱𝘂 responds, yes. Maxwell's lawyer then says, the book you were talking about was from New York, right? And 𝘱𝘂 responds, yes. Maxwell's lawyer and the Post-it notes weren't there. I'm sorry, Maxwell's lawyer asks, and the Post-it notes weren't there, right? And 𝘱𝘂 says, right. But it continues. Attorney USA says, did you take the messages for Mr. Epstein? How? 𝘱𝘂, if he didn't want to take the call or wasn't there. Maxwell's lawyer, there are a number of pages without dates next to the names. Did you know that? And 𝘱𝘂 responds, I guess so. Judge Nathan then states or presides, exhibits admitted. Attorney USA then says they are sealed, not to be put on screens, binders only, more questions. Attorney USA, what supplies did you buy for the massages? And 𝘱𝘂 responds, no, oils. Maxwell's lawyer says, objection. Attorney USA asked, did Miss Maxwell give you supplies? And 𝘱𝘂 responds, exotic oils from other countries. Attorney USA says, Mr. Epstein's door, was it open during the massages? And 𝘱𝘂 responds, never. Afterward, I went in with the gloves. Attorney USA asks why, and he responds to clean up. Attorney USA, what did you see after the massages? Towels? 𝘱𝘂 responds, yes, but not all the massages. Do any of the incidents stand out in your mind? I found a large dildo. What did you do with it? 𝘱𝘂 said, washed it up. Attorney USA then continues questioning. Where did you put the dildo? In Miss Maxwell's bathroom, in a basket. Attorney USA then says, how did you know where to put it? And 𝘱𝘂 responds, I knew everything going on in the house. Attorney USA then asks, what else was in the basket? And 𝘱𝘂 responds, I saw pornographic tapes. Attorney USA asks, how often did you see the dildo? And 𝘱𝘂 says, at least 5 times. And the other one, the massager, did the ball at the end vibrate? And 𝘱𝘂 said, yes, I would put it at the top of Mr. Epstein's dresser. Attorney USA then asks, what photos were in the house? And 𝘱𝘂 says, photos of Mr. Epstein and Miss Maxwell with important people. Attorney at USA then asks, like who? And 𝘱𝘂 responds, and I believe this meant to be spelt Trump. It said Donald Trump, the Pope, I think Fidel Castro. Attorney USA says, were there photographs of naked women? And 𝘱𝘂 says, yes, but those were kept in Miss Maxwell's desk. Why did you leave Mr. Epstein? Oh, okay. Why did you leave Mr. Epstein's employment? 𝘱𝘂 responds, I was sick and tired. Attorney USA said, did you sign a non-disclosure agreement? In other words, an NDA for acronym. And 𝘱𝘂 said yes about both of them. Attorney USA then asked, were you questioned by the police after you received $6,300 from Mr. Epstein? 𝘱𝘂 responds, yes. Were you arrested? No. Nothing further. We'll start our cross-examination tomorrow. It's 4:48. Good decision. Story soon. And that is the end of the transcript. So it sounds like Mr. 𝘱𝘂 was testifying into the concrete details as to what was going on at the home. From what we learn, and we're going to go through this slight recap here from the New York Times because it's actually a well-written recap. What we learn is, through this was how exactly these abusers groom children, what tactics are used, how often are they kept and ensorcelled into the life. And Dr. 𝘱𝘭𝘏 went into detail about this, selecting a victim, obtaining access and isolating the victim, using lies and deception and manipulation to build trust and attachment, desensitizing the victim, physical and sexual touching, and maintaining control to coerce the victim into accepting and continued abuse. The next part, a testimony offered jurors a way to link Maxwell to Epstein's abuses. Dr. 𝘱𝘭𝘏's testimony was meant to bolster the government's case by establishing that Ms. Maxwell played a key role in making the girls vulnerable to Mr. Epstein. The testimony detailed the prosecution's description of Ms. Maxwell in the opening statement. The defendant took these girls on shopping trips, asked them about their lives, their schools, their families. She won their trust. She discussed sexual topics with them. She helped normalize abusive sexual conduct. She put them at ease and made them feel safe so they all could be molested by middle-aged men. Now, I will attest that, although all subjects, all people in this trial are innocent until proven guilty in the court of law, I will attest that this is familiar of a tactic of how we know victims to fall into that life once again. I've said that before, so not to sound like a broken record, but this sounds very familiar and very patterned. A former employee at the Epstein Palm Beach home detailed that Maxwell's pervasive control, and we heard about the heavily instructed manual, that he was supposed to exhibit some sort of, bodily responses when he was around the presence of Epstein, and not to look him in the eyes. And he observed many what he believes to be underage children, girls there, along with topless women majority of the time. So with that being said, that is today's recap on the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, day 4. I will be back tomorrow with day 5, and give you guys that recap as well. Guys, thank you so much for this. And please also share your thoughts about this trial. And, so far I've done 1 through 4 now. And so if you need to catch up, you can go catch up. Also remember that I am viewer funded. There is a tip jar at the bottom. There are several ways you can tip, and believe me, it helps me eat and keep the lights on. So I appreciate every bit of your help. Anyway, guys, I will catch you tomorrow in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, day 5. Take care, take it easy, and I will come back with some more information. Have a great night, guys. Bye-bye.